Alright, what's going on, guys? If you've been keeping up with the channel recently, then you know that the focus of a lot of the conversations we've been having here have been on the future of the game and the idea of a potential DLC. Last week we covered a lot of news pertaining to a potential leak that came from the Bandai Namco hack. And just as a little quick side update, as far as I could find, nothing really came of that hack and everything seems to be okay. But as many of you know, that leak did turn out to be mostly fake. But it did make me realize something that I've neglected to talk about here on the channel, and that is that if we do get a full-scale DLC for this game, what do I think is going to be the central plot point for that? And I have been keeping up with a lot of the speculation going on, and I do think that most people are thinking about this completely wrong. So I'm going to show you a lot of evidence today, something that I know people have not been considering, and rank each idea on a scale from 1 to 10, so let's get into it. For the first one, let's talk about what was the center of discussion for the leak. Now, if you guys remember, what that leak suggested, even though yes it was fake, was a title for the DLC called Barbarians of the Badlands. Now, even though that leak isn't real, we still have a lot of speculation regarding the Badlands themselves, and that it is a great candidate for potential DLC. So, what are the Badlands? In the history of Elden Ring before the events of the game, the lore tells of a period when the Tarnished were exiled from the lands between. Long ago, they lost the guidance of grace in their eyes, and were led across the sea by King Godfrey to a desert land known as the Badlands, where they were ordered to wage war forever, die in those wars, and then eventually be called back by the guidance of grace under the command of Queen Marika. And that is what we see in the intro cutscene and where the game begins. Now, admittedly, it's a part of the lore that isn't explored a whole lot, that we really don't have a lot of context for, and not a lot of information of exactly what happened over there other than the fact that battles were fought. But in order for this to take place in DLC, we would have to go back in time. Now, the idea of time travel in Elden Ring isn't something I'm going to touch on here because that would take a very long explanation for, but it is a possibility. However, one question does arise to me. If we were to have DLC back in time in the Badlands, I'm not sure exactly what purpose that would serve. In the grand scheme of the game, I find it unlikely that we would have DLC that's simply a prologue to the events, especially when the character we're playing as is the active agent in the present time. But if I throw those questions aside, we do actually have some pretty good evidence that this may be a DLC subject. Because when it comes to a game as large as Elden Ring, my personal inclination at what DLC might be is something that is going to be built from the blocks we already have in place in the present game, specifically in the game files. One very odd piece of cut content that was discovered a while back by Sekiro Dubi was some dialogue from King Godfrey that clearly is being spoken to the Tarnished from the Badlands. This dialogue is fully voice acted, and typically when we have cut content and cut dialogue, it'll make sense why it was cut because something in the game already replaces the subject or need for those lines. But this was very different, and I'll let you have a listen real quick.
Brave Tarnished, mighty warriors who fought at my side, await the summons. It will call to thee one day. Heed the fading grace. Listen to the fingers. Gold commandeth the very stars, giving life its fullest brilliance. Elden Ring, oh Elden Ring. Be ready once it is shattered. Seek the Elden Ring, oh Tarnished. Across the sea of fog to the lands between. Become Lord. Enact thy will.
Now, what I find very odd about that is that Godfrey says the line, "once it is shattered," in reference to the Elden Ring, meaning that this dialogue definitely takes place before the shattering, so it doesn't fit at all in any events of the game other than potentially the intro cutscene. And other drafts have also been discovered of the intro cutscene within the file, so I don't think that was the intention either. In my opinion, the only way this makes sense is from the perspective of us within the Badlands, and actively talking to Godfrey. But I will say within the files there is isn't any other evidence of the Badlands themselves being a playable area, at least as far as I know. However, a desert area is something that's been speculated forever in the Souls series, and the fact that we still haven't had one so far is very surprising. But overall, I rank the Badlands as a potential DLC candidate a 6 out of 10, simply due to the fact that I don't believe there's a proper reason to go there. But that Cut Godfrey dialogue definitely has me curious, and I can't completely count it out. Up next, we have the one that most people are speculating about, a DLC revolving around the story of Miquella and his frequently referenced rebirth. Now, when I was talking about the Badlands, I said that what I think is going to be the biggest suggester for the setting of the DLC are the files that we already have in the game. Now again, all of the Dark Souls DLCs have been very obscure and practically unrelated to the original game, so I could be entirely off on that. However, with the size of Elden Ring, I can't imagine they would want to start from zero. But if we want to go with that hunch, then perhaps Miquella's story is the best candidate, because we have a lot of things within the game files that reference him. But let me give you the very quick rundown on Miquella's lore. Miquella is the twin brother of Melania, the Empyrean children of Radagon and Marika. The twins were born with a curse at birth. Melania's was the Scarlet Rot, while Miquella's curse was to forever remain a child. But despite his childhood stature, his mind was very advanced, and he devised ways to be better than the Golden Order and circumvent his curse by creating a rival to the Erd Tree known as the Halig Tree, which would serve as a womb for his rebirth as a full god. But that plan was interrupted when Mohg the Lord of Blood stole him from the Halig Tree, and now keeps him in a makeshift womb and cocoon deep underground. Now, in the game files, we find several things that are in relation to Miquella, the most notable being a cut twin blade, formed from the combinations of the Rune of Rot and the Rune of Abundance. Now, we know the Rune of Rot is Melania's, so it stands to reason that the Rune of Abundance is Miquella's. Now, aside from that, other cut quests within the game mention that Miquella is in fact a character in the lore known as Saint Trina. Now, Sekiro Doobie and Lance McDonald have great videos about that topic, so if you want to learn more about that, I'd highly recommend checking their channels out. But Saint Trina all throughout the lore is a character closely associated with sleep and dreams. And we do know that going into a character's dream is something we do in the game. We enter Fia's dream about Godwyn, who we know is a comrade of Miquella. So the theory goes that we're going to interact with Miquella's hand sticking out of the egg here and enter his dream to help with his rebirth. So the question is, why then would we, the player, have a reason to do this? For that, I'm not entirely sure, but we do know that also in the game files are the workings of a 7th ending involving Gideon Ofnir, and if you do his quest in game, you learn that the sole goal that he is pursuing is unraveling the mysteries of Miquella and his Halig Tree. So I imagine if we do end up getting a DLC about Miquella, it'll likely unlock that 7th ending. So for the likelihood of a Miquella DLC, I'm gonna give it an 8 out of 10, because that is by far the biggest part of the game that we have such little information about. Miquella is a character that is constantly hyped up in the lore, and I think to not see his storyline get fleshed out would be a huge wasted opportunity. However, I am going to reserve some points, because y'all know how unpredictable FromSoftware can be. Now, here's where we're going to start to go quick. While the Badlands and Miquella's dreams are the ones that we have the most evidence for in-game, there are a lot of other theories out there that I believe have merit and should be considered. First off, the PvP arenas. While those aren't really a full-scale DLC on their own, they would be a new part of the game for the player to explore, so I'm going to throw them in here. For those of you that don't know, around the world of Elden Ring, you can see 3 massive arenas that are currently inaccessible but are fully detailed on the inside, and definitely seem like somewhere we're going to go in the future. Now, every Souls game in the past has had an arena like this, so it was kind of a surprise when Elden Ring didn't. However, Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 3's both came with DLC, and I imagine Elden Ring's is going to do the same. So to give the arenas a likelihood score, I'm going to say 9 out of 10. I am going to hold 1 point back though, just because it hasn't been completely confirmed yet. Up next, we have a DLC revolving around the Gloam-Eyed Queen. For those of you that don't know, the Gloam-Eyed Queen is a character we never actually see in Elden Ring, but read about several times in the lore. She was the leader of the Godskins during the Godskin hunts, long before the events of the game, but was ultimately beaten and sealed away by Malekith the Black Blade. Now, here's where the conspiracy theory begins. Many people, including myself, believe that this form of Melina we see in the Frenzied Flame ending is the Gloam-Eyed Queen, at least in some capacity. Because as you play through the game, you're going to hear Melina refer to Destined Death several times, as if it's something she's well acquainted with. We know Destined Death was the main source of the Gloam-Eyed Queen's power, and we only see this form of Melina if Melina is both alive and Destined Death is unseen. unsealed. Also, her eye is the color of a gloaming sky, so there's that too. Now, she does send the player off with the threat that she is going to hunt us down, but the problem is, the world is destroyed at this point, and personally, I don't think that makes for a very good DLC setting. But I do have to admit that Melina was a criminally underused character in this game. It really seemed like she was going to be much more involved with our story. And I really do hope that whatever DLC we get to learn more about her character, because there are so many questions when it comes to her story, and little to no answers whatsoever. But to give a likelihood score for a Gloam-eyed Queen DLC, I'm gonna have to give it a 4 out of 10, simply because the continuation of the Gloam-eyed Queen story only works if Melina is the Gloam-eyed Queen and the player does the Frenzied Flame ending. And in a game with 6 endings, I don't think it's likely that a DLC is going to continue after just one of those. But I don't want to write it off completely, because I do want to learn more about Melina's story, but we're just gonna have to wait and see on that one. Now, here's one that is very obscure, but I'm going to entertain for a second. Something that threw a lot of people off in the game, from a lore perspective, was the appearance of Godwyn's corpse. Notably the mermaid/fish tail that he has. And this has led a lot of people to be looking for aquatic imagery. However, I'm not sure of any major connections. Now, somebody please correct me if you know what I'm about to talk about, but I remember a long time ago, right when the game came out, it may have even been in the closed network test, I don't remember, but I distinctly remember a conversation going around about some item that was found in the files, some kind of statue that looked like a mermaid. However, I tried researching it again and couldn't find anything about it, and I really don't think I'm crazy. However, there has been a conversation going around about a possible underwater DLC, or at least some kind of aquatic themed area. Now, there is virtually no evidence for this, but as I mentioned before, the DLCs for the past games have been completely unrelated to the main storyline. Now, a lot of you may remember when a post was going around showing that the center point of all the Divine Towers was this cloud in the middle of the map. And after that post came out, some people started journeying there with cheats and found a weird unloaded texture right in that midpoint. Now, I did some investigating after this, and I found that if you placed a marker on that point, you can see it from the Eternal Cities. Now, almost definitely when we do get DLC, it is going to be loading in some new areas, but I just don't think it makes for enough evidence of it being a DLC location. So giving a likelihood score for an underwater themed DLC, I'm going to say 2 out of 10 just because that is basically a guess, but you never know, the DLCs have almost always surprised us in the past. And we could go on and on with potential theories and guesses. The more I look into the lore of Elden Ring, the more questions pop up, and the more I find storylines and things that can be expanded upon. I mean, look at Vike, for example. He was the main marketing point for the game, and he's even on the cover, but his entire questline was cut out of the game. They're even selling promotional figures of him. But I say that to illustrate the point that the amount of cut content in Elden Ring is honestly unprecedented, and they could honestly choose at random and make a full-scale DLC out of it. But let me know what you think the DLC is going to be about if we get it down in the comments below. And that's going to pretty much do it for the video today. Leave a like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you're new around here, and I'll catch you in the next one.